So what's the source of corruption on this planet? Right, it's no secret that this planet has been riddled with corruption from ruling forces. I mean, you look back at history, the governments, the rulers, the kings, the queens have, had an abuse of power throughout history. This is a common theme. And you look at our politics today, and they're rampant with corruption in politics across the world and probably in your country too. No matter what country it is, it seems to be going on everywhere, doesn't it? And so why? Why is everything like this? Why is there such wealth inequality? Why is everything so weird on this planet? It doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to live like this, not at all. Why are we living like this? Why do things seem so not right here? Okay, so let's look at this. So, I started to realize this, that this was kind of going on, that, things weren't right on this planet. We don't have to live like this. Our society's all messed up. What are we doing here? That started to become pretty obvious to me as I started to grow up, right? Yeah. And, I really started to get into philosophy. I started questioning my religious beliefs. I was like, well, I don't know about this anymore. And really started questioning that, how does God even know? What does this even mean? Why does he want us to do this? I didn't, I had a lot of questions there, and how this stuff even works, and I just started to give up on that and focus more on a scientific approach to philosophical understanding. And, so I really got into philosophy in school, and I started studying a lot of theoretical physics because I really wanted to get some answers that way. I wanted to figure out, what's really going on with this universe. How are things like this at all? So I really started to question that and look into that more deeply, and I took up the avenue of academic study in philosophy. And I started researching different views in theoretical physics and stuff to try to get an explanation of how this world works, how the universe functions. And so, I started studying philosophy in schools, and I was taught certain perspectives in the academic institution of their philosophical views. And initially, I bought into it for a little while. And one of the major premises of the academic philosophical perspective is the idea of reductive physicalism. This, I was told many times, is the leading theory in philosophy. Okay. Now, what does this theory really entail exactly? Well, the idea of physicalism is the concept that everything in the universe is fundamentally physical. Okay? Right? Or material. It's not exactly material, and, we kind of know that, with the science. You go down, you look, and you try to find the smallest material bit. It's not material at all. You look down, you try to find, you go farther and farther, and you get the atom and the subatomic particles. They're not really particles. There's nothing material. You don't see anything at all. It's just more like a force in a field, and then they attribute that to being a particle. But, there's no material substance that you can directly observe there. Okay, and that's why, but they still call physicalism is the idea that everything is physical, and reductive physicalism particularly posits the idea that consciousness is something that arises and can be reduced to physical aspects, and that consciousness is not something that exists. We'll say, consciousness is not something that exists in itself separate from physical phenomenon. So all physical phenomenon has a direct correlation to consciousness, and that there is, so as opposed to the idea of dualism, which is the concept that there is the physical and then there is something separate that exists as consciousness. That, there's the spirit or, something separate, consciousness that exists from the physical. And the idea of physicalism, particularly reductive physicalism, suggests that consciousness is nothing more than a physical process, that consciousness is something what they call a epiphenomenon of the brain. And so the very concept here is that consciousness does not have its own causal efficacy, that all causation is stemming from the physical. That consciousness is not its own aspect of causation, that there is no such conscious causal efficacy, so there's no free will. That your consciousness is more like an illusion of physical states, and that's really nothing at all that can actually impact the world. It's just you're basically a meaningless observer of your reality rather than an active participant. That's really their view. Yeah, it's a pretty shitty one, Yeah. Kind of is, and it's the outlook, and I bought into this perspective for a while, and I wasn't happy with it, but I thought, well, that's what there is, that's consciousness is something that there is a physical world out there, and that physical world somehow made life, and then that life evolved to have this illusion of consciousness, but it's just. That's nothing really in and of itself. Consciousness is nothing other than just an illusion of physical states. Consciousness does not have its own causal efficacy, and consciousness does not play a role in shaping the environment. It is nothing more than a byproduct of the environment with actually no input. And, I started to grow a little skeptical of this view too. I was like, I don't really know about this. And so I really started to look into this more. And, the idea of the hard problem of consciousness was like, how? How does, if you're positing that there is something physical out there, and it's that physical, non-conscious matter somehow becomes conscious? How? What does that mean? And it's just, how can non-consciousness become consciousness? I don't think it can. That's why I'm not a physicalist. I'm not a reductive physicalist. I don't think that view really adds up. I don't think it makes any sense. I think it's as dumb as all religions, the institutionalized religions. Yeah. And it's a shallow and limited belief system. Yeah, and there's there's much better stuff out there in science that suggests, because this idea of reductive physicalism is one paradigm, it's one philosophical view. It is not what science says. It is a certain paradigm of the scientific community. It is a certain paradigm of philosophy. But, so, there's different interpretations of what we have of scientific data. It's not that data necessarily suggests that it's reductive physicalism. That's just certain scientists or philosophers' interpretation. Okay? That's very relevant, So, there's other views out there that are just as much scientific. They're just not within that mainstream paradigm. Now, this idea of a mainstream paradigm and who controls what's in the mainstream, well, that's what we're going to get at here. Yeah, so. Okay, so, well, where were we then? So this idea of reductive physicalism, I was like, I didn't really get it, and it wasn't like I couldn't understand it, it took me a few years to get to the point to be able to understand this, and then I, kind of started to understand this and kind of bought into it a little while and thought I was real smart, like, oh, I got it, the universe works by physical laws, and the universe is a physical thing, and it just but it's all physical, and there's no there's no free will, there's no sense of agency, because where could that be? Where could that come from? It's all just a physical process, but then it's like, well, then you don't have free will, you're nothing, you're meaningless, and it's just like, well, once I really spent some time with this, I was like, well, okay, and so I really, then I kind of got interested in this hard problem of consciousness. And I started doing a lot more research on my own of, consciousness and theoretical physics. And I started getting into quantum mechanics. And I found some interesting stuff there. There's different theories in regards to consciousness and quantum mechanics. And it's not necessarily in support of reductive physicalism. But, I just never really talked about those in school. And, the idea of a non-local consciousness, this stuff was very interesting. That consciousness isn't contained within a time and space. It's not an epiphenomenon of the brain. And I'm studying this a lot, trying to work on how better to explain all this. But, the idea is that consciousness, is within everything, and that everything is its own feedback loop system. And that consciousness is synonymous with the feedback loop system, and everything has its own feedback loop system, and within the quantum level, and it's all connected through these micro wormhole states. Look into Nassim Haramein's work. Also, you can check out Stuart Hamerhoff's Sir Roger Penrose's work of orchestrated objective reduction. And then within there, they correlate the idea of the quantum wave function collapse with consciousness, and that that there's all these proto-conscious events, and that they orchestrate together and form higher levels of consciousness, and correlate the ideas of these proto-conscious events building up to our level of consciousness. And so the basic idea is, it's not reductive physicalism. Consciousness is not a product of the brain states. Consciousness kind of exists within everything, and that it's all these, they call it proto-conscious events, and everything is a wave function collapse of proto-consciousness building itself up to these higher levels of consciousness that we experience as a human. Okay, yeah, that takes a lot more explanation there. I wasn't really going to get into all the details of that in this view, because there's a lot going on there. I'm studying this a lot. I didn't do the best job explaining it, but that'll be for another time here. What we're getting at now, so why was that stuff never discussed? Why was those different theories, why is that aspect never discussed in, why were these different interpretations of quantum mechanics never discussed in school? I was wondering that. They kind of only gave you the limited understanding of reductive physicalism as, well, this is what we think consciousness is. And it was like, well, why don't we really discuss these other views, And why these other views are important, because they relate back to different types of theories in philosophy and different types of ways different philosophers have articulated a different understanding of the universe that is not reductive physicalism. They have these different understandings, that consciousness is something more inherent within existence, and that, it's like idealism, that, it's consciousness that creates reality, and that, it's prevalent in Eastern philosophy. And you can see the similarities between these, theories in quantum mechanics and with certain views of Eastern philosophy. And you can see these, in other types of idealism schools, like, Immanuel Kant or German idealism, George Berkeley, and so you got all those different theories there that, kind of relate in different understandings of consciousness. And I was wondering, well, why aren't we learning about all this? And then, I really got into Nassim Haramein's work too, and learned about the fractal and holographic nature to our universe. And, well, that stuff's really interesting. And the ideas of sacred geometry. And, and that stuff's really good too. And he found, Sim found that, at the very space-time level, in the space-time field, that it's made up of what he calls Planck spherical units, which are arranged in a sphere-packing manner, an overlapping manner, and, that creates the flower of life pattern. Okay, and then within that flower of life pattern, there's ability to make the cube octahedron and his 64 tetrahedron grid, which then has those abilities to have all the platonic solids, and in its collapse and rotation of like the cube octahedron, can form all these platonic solids, which they also simulate, correlate to the elements, the 5 elements: earth, air, water, spirit, ether, and let me think. Earth. You got the earth, you got the air, you got the water, fire, of course. Yeah, earth, air, fire, water, ether. Yeah, okay, right? And then so it's correlated with all that. And so it's like, this is interesting stuff here, right, guys? Like, this is some pretty interesting stuff. And, I wasn't, you were taught in philosophy, I was taught, that kind of like these other views existed, but nothing in how, like, our modern science has figured out some stuff in terms of an interpretation and understanding of these views. It was only given that, no, modern science thinks this, and, it's, consciousness is this epiphenomenon of the brain, and, we don't need to look any further, and, there's all kinds of problems with this theory, but this is our leading theory. And it was, so what became interesting to me is why, so I started to think, like, what's up with this? Why aren't we being taught these other views of quantum mechanics? Why aren't we being taught the idea of a fractal holographic universe and of sacred geometry? I didn't understand why I wasn't being taught any of that. Why, not that it was necessarily the correct view or even a better view. I certainly think it is. But, it wasn't even being discussed as a view, which I found weird. Why wasn't it even, as if it wasn't even, it's certainly relevant to be discussed as a view, guys. Come on, right? It is, when you really look into it, I think it makes a lot more sense. Okay, so why wasn't it being discussed at all? And so I began, I was very interested in that. And so I started to, really look into it and question this, like, why isn't this being discussed? And, I found some pretty interesting things here. Yeah. And so, I started looking into, the ancient history and stuff. And I found that, actually, some of our ancient ancestors may have had an understanding of this stuff. And that's, why, like I was saying, that they kind of had this whole, that this modern theories, these other alternate theories in quantum mechanics and theoretical physics and all that could actually relate more to some of this ancient understanding. And so I found that kind of interesting, so I started looking into more of that and everything, right? And I found that, maybe they might have had this understanding, so they had, clearly had this spiritual kind of understanding here. And, more, and it all stems around, consciousness not being just a physical product of the brain. And, now they'll just be like, well, it's because they didn't know. And, that's what they want you to believe, that all these people back in the day were just dumb savages, primitive people. And they, that built these megalithic structures, like all these pyramids across the world, with their simple tools and their primitive understanding, because they were dumb, stupid savages that just built these buildings for tombs and some dumb shit like that. That's what they want you to believe, yeah. And why do they want you to believe that? Well, that's the whole point of this video a little bit, yeah. So, so I started looking into that stuff, like, and I started to notice, through the Sims work, they were teaching me a lot of stuff, that they may have had this understanding in the ancient times. And you can actually see this flower of life structure that he found to be the geometric pattern of the space-time field. They have those depictions on, etched in or engraved in, burned in, I don't know what, it's some interesting ways they have it so it lasts for thousands of years. They have these structures painted on their walls, or well, not just painted, right? They have them etched into their walls, different various places and locations. And, the fact that the mathematical precision that these things are built, it is no accident. You can't just accidentally build something with this incredible precision, right? I mean, that's just not something you could do. You don't just accidentally align it perfectly. The chances of it, popping to be aligned perfectly one part and then all the other parts, and that's beyond chance. The much more likely explanation is that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they were able to build these things with this exact precision. And these massively heavy blocks, to be able to arrange them with such precise precision, right? And we're supposed to believe that they just did this because they were stupid people with primitive tools? And they just had slaves? Well, you can do anything with slaves, right? Okay, sure. Yeah, if the slaves were geniuses that had a profound understanding of physics, maybe. Yeah. But, they probably kept that from the slaves too. Because that's what we're getting at here. What was the original premise of here? What's the source of corruption? Yeah, okay, this is all rhetoric, getting back to the source of corruption on this planet. Yeah. Because it's all philosophical corruption. And that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to tie it all back now. Yeah, because, okay, so, we got this, evidence with these massive megalithic structures, dude. They're all over the place, man. These are evidence of something, that these people weren't primitive. Now, we'll try to hide it. And why are they trying to hide it? Well, that's the whole point. It's part of the source of corruption on this planet. Okay. So, you get the premise. You can start looking at this stuff yourself. There's a lot of stuff on all these pyramids. And, the other stuff is not even just pyramids. There's Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge. There's all kinds of stuff. And so why do they build these things? And what was going on with this and how? And could they have had a profound understanding of the universe, philosophy and energy dynamics to be able to manipulate these massive stones and arrange them so precisely? And clearly they must have had a profound understanding of mathematics to be able to, all the mathematical extrapolations you can find from these sites. Look into that. There's tons of stuff. I'm not going to sit here and name it all of them. I don't remember all of them, but there's tons of them, okay? Look into it, please. Yeah. It's all over the place, you're probably familiar with some of it, and you just think like, oh, well, okay. But, the official story, they would never lie to us in schools. They can't all be wrong. Yeah, okay. Well, maybe they could. Okay, so, what's going on here? And where do these people say they got this knowledge? They'll tell you right here. They say they got it from the gods. Yeah, okay. Whoa, what? They talk about all kinds of these gods and beings from the sky. It's a common